We've come now to the end of John's Gospel, chapter 9, and we've come to the final section on the story of the man who was born blind at birth and whom Jesus healed and restored his sight. We've seen how that took place in the first part of John 9. We saw the Pharisees investigating the miracle and denouncing Jesus and throwing the man out of the synagogue in the second part of John 9. And now we come to the third and final part of this same story. I'm reading to you from verse 35 to 41. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." And some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this, and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." The epilogue, the final task. It's interesting the way in which Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out, and when he had found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" This is a show of compassion here. And it's an interesting show of compassion, it seems to me. Jesus didn't have to go back and see this man or find him out. And indeed, what you have is a concern for the welfare of this person. In some ways, Jesus was responsible, not only in restoring his sight, but responsible for him being thrown out of the synagogue. What that meant was being disfellowshipped. As I say, the term these days would be to be cancelled, to lose pretty well everything, to lose your connections with society, with your folk, with your friends, with your family possibly. Everyone else would be able to go to the synagogue and share in the community life of the Jewish way of living. To be thrown out of the synagogue, that excommunication, was a serious punishment, serious penalty. They wouldn't have him back in. It meant being on your own, isolated, by yourself, not able to partake of any of the Jewish festivals or partake of any of the sacrifices or any of the worship or offerings. To be cut off from God, essentially, is how the Jews would see it. And that would probably be a lifetime ban. So we see that's a very cruel and callous kind of an act. And it's very similar to what happens today when people say things which others disagree with or don't go along with. The way in which people are thrown out of their jobs, are cast aside from family and friends, simply because they hold views which maybe disagree with other people's views. And in that sense, we haven't changed very much in 2,000 years. There's still that kind of callous cruelty in alienating and isolating people. And that's a serious and a real punishment for many. Jesus understands the punishment of that, the pain that would cause to be isolated from your community in that kind of a way. And he has compassion on that particular man. And he goes and seeks him out. It may not be very easy to seek out such a person as that, though I suspect he did have connections and asked around and got people to find out where he was. But Jesus made an effort to get in contact with him again and to confront the man. and to speak to him. Now, it's interesting because clearly this man had never seen Jesus before. Because, after all, he'd been born blind when Jesus came to him beforehand and put the mud on his eyes and sent him off. He'd never seen Jesus, and he only restored his sight when he got to the pool of Siloam some way away, sometime later. He'd never seen Jesus. Jesus had seen him, and Jesus found him and then confronted him. And he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, this is to do with spiritual connection. Your spiritual connection with your community has been broken. Your spiritual connection maybe with your family, with everything that would give you a connection to God has been severed. But I can restore that connection with God, which is why I want to seek you out. And that connection is restored by believing in me. Do you believe in the Son of Man? It's to reunite him with God through Jesus Christ. The man said, "Who is he, sir?" The man asked, "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." I wonder if he had a clue who he was being spoken to. I wonder if he knew that it was Jesus, the man who had given him his sight back. Maybe, or maybe not. It's not very important here, because the term Son of Man, I don't know what that would have meant to the blind man here, whether he would have understood the term Son of Man. It may have been a term which was unfamiliar to him, Son of Man. In fact, if you think of it, doesn't make a lot of sense as a description, because Son of Man applies to everyone. Everyone is a son of man if they're male, because you must have a father in order to be in existence. Everyone's a son of man descriptively. But as a title, it means something different. It means someone who is spoken about in the scriptures, someone who is prophesied to come, someone who holds a special position in the world as the Son of Man and the Son of God, both wielding those titles together. Anyway, he says, "Tell me so that I may believe in him, may believe in the person of the one who is sent by God." Who is he? Jesus said, "You have now seen him," and he couldn't have seen him before, but you have now seen him. Now, at this point, you're seeing him right now. And in fact, he is the one speaking with you. Putting himself into third person here, which is a bit unusual. But instead of saying, "I am he is the one who is speaking with you." Not sure if there's a conclusion we can draw from that distinction between first person and third person. Leave it to one side for a moment. The man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And at this point, it must be the case that he understands that this is the prophet, okay? The prophet who he spoke of earlier on, the man himself, he is a prophet. The Jews didn't believe, but he believed he was the prophet. He believed he was a person from God. And he must have understood this term, the Son of Man, as being someone who speaks of the prophet, someone who speaks of the Messiah, someone who speaks of a man sent from God. That's what's implicit in this term. And the blind man, when he says, "Who is he, sir?" who is really saying, "Who cured me? Who gave me my sight back? Who was it? Did you see? Do you know who he is?" And Jesus said, "You've seen him. In fact, it's he who is speaking with you now." Now, that must have had a profound impact upon the man. You're the one who gave me my sight back. You're the one who restored me to see things which I have never seen in my life before. You are the one who has revolutionized my entire life, turned everything around for me, and given to me things which I've never had. It's not surprising when he realized that this is the one who did that. It said, the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. I think it would be very difficult not to be overwhelmed when confronted with the person who did this, to thank him in a profoundly sincere way, to adore and worship because he recognizes that he's a man sent from God. He'd already said that. He'd already made that clear. He said that you don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. No one's ever heard of someone opening the eyes of the man born blind, and if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So you are from God. And that's why he worshipped him and gave him the glory. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. And the blindness he's speaking of here now, of course, is the blindness of recognizing who he is. We're not talking about mere physical sight, we're talking about spiritual sight. For this judgment I've come into the world. The judge is the one who divides between one group and another group. He puts a dividing line down the center of the world, and there was some on the right-hand side and there was some on the left-hand side. There are the blind who will see, and there are those who claim to see who are blind. That's the nature of this particular judgment. Judges always divide between the two. They weigh up one against the other. And that's a form of judgment here that's taking place. Just to repeat those words for you. For judgment I have come into the world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. And there you have the blind man who will see. He doesn't just see physically. He sees spiritually. And what he sees is Jesus Christ is from God. He is the Son of Man. He is the Messiah. And he puts his trust in him. That's what he sees. And on the other side of the fence, you have this other group of people, so that those who see will become blind. And again, this is spiritual blindness. We have the Pharisees who claim to see, who claim to understand, who claim to follow the scriptures and understand the scriptures better than anybody else. And yet they become blind to who Jesus Christ really is. They become blind to the fact that he is sent from God. They become blind to the fact that he is the Messiah who will save his people from their sins. They're blind to all of that. Even though they see physically, they are blind spiritually. And even though the blind man can now see physically, he has become also spiritually sighted as well. That's the dividing line that Jesus Christ himself has brought. For judgment I have come into the world. It's a judgment which is automatic. It's a judgment which occurs to everybody who looks at Jesus Christ and assesses him. How do you come away in your view of Jesus Christ? How do you see him? Do you see him as a charlatan, maybe just a good man, maybe a madman, maybe whatever? Do you claim that, like the Pharisees, he is a fake and a fraud? Or do you claim that he is who he claims to be, the Son of God, the Son of Man, the Messiah? Well, that division still exists today, depending upon which side of the fence you put yourself on. You can put yourself on either side of that fence according to how you view this same person. He is, therefore, your judge. You are judged according to what you make of Jesus Christ. That's what he says. That's his point here. For judgment I have come into the world. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and said, "What? Are we blind too?" Well, of course, Jesus has said that those who see will become blind. Are you saying that we're blind, Jesus? Are you saying that we're blind? Is that what you're saying here? We're not blind, Jesus. We know exactly what the situation is. We're not blind, neither physically nor spiritually, and we understand you for who you are. You are a fraud and a fake and a sinner. That's how we know you. That's basically what they're saying. Jesus said, if you were blind, then you would not be guilty of sin. You wouldn't understand. You wouldn't see things. You would not be guilty, therefore. But the fact that you claim that you can see, the fact that you claim to follow Moses, the fact that you claim to understand, the fact that you claim to see clearly is a testimony against you. It's a judgment against you. And therefore, because you claim to understand these things, your guilt remains. And that's an interesting relative concept here. If you claim not to understand things, then you may not be guilty. But you claim to understand all too well. You claim to write me off as a sinner. And therefore, the judgment stands. What you make of Jesus Christ is the nature of where each one of us stands at this particular junction. What we make of Jesus is where the judgment line falls.